any host society, north and south. And that doesn't depend on the documentation they have. Well, it does depend, but whether or not they're documented doesn't mean that they have a voice. We should not equate that with having no agency. They have lots of agency. They exercise it every day. They make life-threatening decisions, life-altering decisions on a very regular basis. Just taking the metro is a life-altering decision when you are undocumented, because you can be arrested, detained, deported. They have lots of agency. There are lots of underground networks for them to tap on to get help, etc. That's all that exists. But they don't have access to the political stage. They don't participate in public debates. And that's a huge limitation in host societies. They rarely, it happens from time to time, 2006 in the US, for example, but they rarely protest, contest, organize, unionize. Because sticking their neck out to defend their rights may mean being detected as undocumented or identified as a troublemaker by the employer. And that the consequence of which may be detention and deportation. Migrants and their families and their communities have often invested beyond their means in the migration project of this or that migrant. And they've invested in time, in energy, in money, but also in physical and mental health. And migrants often undertake this migration project guided by a sense of duty or simply out of love for their family members. And so anything that threatens the migration project, the central objective of their lives very often, is something that's dangerous. Speaking up, protesting, fighting for your rights is dangerous. And most often, migrants in a precarious situation will choose to move on and not to defend their rights. If you haven't been paid for 4 months, take your losses, find another employer, and try to get some money and send some money at the end of the week to your family. You don't go after the employer who hasn't paid you. There are two structural factors that contribute to the marginalization of migrants. One is that the best political system we've ever invented to govern ourselves, electoral democracy, is based on electoral incentive. Politicians listen because we can vote them out. Without a vote, migrants provide no electoral incentive whatsoever, and politicians can ignore them, especially if this might trigger a negative, if doing something about migrants might trigger a negative electoral reaction. That's a structural limitation of electoral democracy we're not going to overcome anytime soon. A second structural factor is economic, not political. We have delocalized many things to benefit from lower labor costs in the South, but many of our economic sectors cannot be delocalized. Farming cannot be delocalized. The land is here. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, care at home or in institutions, fisheries, extraction, none of this can be delocalized. And so for these sectors, what we've done is that we've delocalized the working conditions of the South to the North. And we have created, I'm not sure it was done on purpose at the beginning as a strategy, but let's say we've tolerated, and we're quite happy with, vast underground labor markets, and we have created, and this time purposefully, immigration statuses that are extremely precarious and that oblige the migrant workers to accept whatever conditions they're offered. Because it's that or you're back home. That's the agricultural temporary migrant worker programs, etc. So we've created that. We create precariousness in order to silence the migrants. That's what we've done in the past, mostly in the past 30 years. These are two structural things that will not change anytime soon, especially the economic one. We consumers don't protest when the price of the strawberry basket in Marché Jean Talon is $2 in June. We don't protest. We actually like it. We can do jams or, cheaply. The farmers don't protest to have cheap labor. The mayors of the villages out there don't protest because they have 18 farms that are working well. And the Minister of Finance is collecting taxes from all these people. And the migrants are not complaining. So where's the problem? So these are structural issues where the voice of the migrants is absent. And so migrants are absent from public policy debates on migration. And therefore, these debates are not informed by the experience of migrants, the experience of those who are most affected by these migration policies that we have created. Much of the public debates and policy activity on migration is based on stereotypes, threats, fantasies, which migrants cannot alter because they're not part of the debate. Actually, migration policies are mostly made by people who have no idea what migration is all about. It's made by citizens who've never moved, very often. It's like, and comparison I think is quite apt, it's like the policies about women being made by committees of men not that long ago, based on fantasies and stereotypes. And we hear that, well, the battle after, 80 years or so after the fact that the women gained the right to vote, well, politicians still have stereotypes and fantasies about women. And we're battling people like Weinstein and others. So even where the right to vote is difficult, without the right to vote, it's more difficult. And so these stereotypes and fantasies fuel the nationalist populist agenda and discourse that we hear today, reinforcing the negative public perceptions of migrants, increasing the pressure in favor of ever more repressive policies in a very vicious downward spiral. The problem is that this lack of vote is key. All other marginalized communities that have been mentioned tonight have wrestled their rights out of the hands of the majority. They've not been given their rights. It's not true. They've wrestled them. And because they fought for that. If migrants are not fighting for it, who will? And that, to me, is a big problem. We will have to think of changing voting rights. I think voting rights should go to any person who's a long-term resident of this country. But I think you might agree with me that this is, in the present context, an inaudible proposition. So I haven't put that in any of my reports. I want it to, appear to be serious. So until then, there's very little civic space for migrants in the situation. Migrants are essentially voiceless, and so civil society is absolutely essential for them, knowing that they fear talking to civil society in many cases. They will talk to each other, they will talk to underground organizations or overground organizations, the counter organizations that represent them in very specific contexts, but very often, not appearing to be collaborating with anyone whose branded human rights is the strategy. Is civil society working with migrants at risk? Well, I'll go through the same exercise as my predecessor. Yes. Unionization of migrant workers is not really encouraged anywhere. It's prohibited in many countries. If it's not prohibited, it's made practically impossible. For example, in Qatar, where I did an official visit, migrant workers who are all mostly, some of them are undocumented, but mostly they have temporary migrant worker status. Very precarious, but still a status. They could unionize in unions, but there is one article in the law that says that in order for a union to be legal, it has to have 10 members with Qatari citizenship. Qataris don't unionize. No. Period. Because they receive lots from government. They don't unionize again. So there's no union for Qataris. There's no union for migrants whatsoever. Human rights defenders of migrant workers are harassed and excluded almost everywhere. And I met one of them in Qatar, and we worked together discreetly, And about 2 years after I had made my visit, he was born and raised. He was of Indian origin. His parents had been doctors in Qatar. They've been in Qatar for 50 years, something like that. They've been doctors there. They're retired today. He was born, raised in Qatar, been to India 3 times, I think, in his life. And he left to do a master's degree in Singapore and LSE, joint master's degree. And he returned home for Christmas only to learn at the airport that he was persona non grata. And he had to leave. But that's the place where he was born, raised, where he had his job. And he had a job with a very important government organization in Qatar. And he was banned for 2 years. Then he was authorized to come back. And that was directly targeting his work with migrants, his